That's not gonna be so yummy. I had my mouth and I have money.
Applause, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Circle Society, welcome to this 25th reading of the Christmas Carol. We hope to get it right this time. There are no guarantees. Shall we begin? Everybody sitting comfortably? Yeah.
Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, his sole mourner. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I'm going to relate. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name, however. There it yet stood years afterwards above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. He answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, was Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. External heat and cold had little influence on him. No warmth could warm, no cold could chill him. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then wag their tails as though they said, "Oh, no eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, upon a Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting, foggy weather, and the city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who, in his dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. He couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed.
"A Merry Christmas, Uncle. God bless you."
It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation Scrooge had of his approach.
"Ah, humbug. Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure."
I do, out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money, a time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer, a time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you? If I had my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart, he should.
Uncle,
If you keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine.
keep it, but you don't keep it.
Let me leave it alone then. Much good it do, much good it's ever done you.
Well, there are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, Christmas among the rest. But I'm sure I have always thought of Christmas time when it came round as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of other people come over them as if they really were fellow travellers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say, God bless it.
The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded.
Let me hear another sound from you, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir. I wonder you don't go into parliament.
Oh, don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow.
Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed, he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said he'd see them in that extremity first.
But why? Why?
Why did you get married?
Well, because I fell in love.
Because you fell in love. Good afternoon.
No, you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?
Good afternoon.
I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?
Good afternoon.
Look, I'm sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We never had any quarrel to which I've been a party, but I've made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle.
Good afternoon.
And a Happy New Year.
Good afternoon.
His nephew left the room without an angry word notwithstanding. The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlewomen, pleasant to behold, and now stood in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hand and bowed to him.
Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?
Mr. Marley hath been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago, this very night.
We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir.
Oh, are there no prisons?
Oh, plenty of prisons.
And the union workhouses are still in operation?
Oh, they are, still. I wish I could say they were not.
And the treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor then?
Oh, both very busy, sir.
Ah, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it.
But under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the unoffending multitude, a few of us are endeavoring to raise up a fund to buy the poor some meat, drink, and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for?
Nothing.
Oh, you wish to be anonymous.
I wish to be left alone. Since you ask me what I wish, ladies, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there.
Well, many can't go there, and many would rather die.
If they would rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the ladies withdrew. At length the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge, dismounting from his stool, tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat.
You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose?
If quite convenient, sir.
It is not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself mightily ill-used, I'll be bound.
Yes, sir.
And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work.
It's only once a year, sir.
Poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 20th of December. I suppose you must have the whole day and be here all the earlier next morning.
The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went down a slide at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honor of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home as hard as he could pelt to play at blindman's buff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms, in a lowering pile of building up a yard. The building was old enough now, and dreary enough that nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door of his house, except that it was very large. Also, that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also, that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London. And yet, Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face, with a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but it looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up upon its ghostly forehead. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled would be untrue, but he put his hand upon the key, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause, however, and look cautiously behind the door, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door, so he said, "Cuckoo," and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder, Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door, walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for its being very dark. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and a little saucepan of gruel, Scrooge had a cold in his head, upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual, old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, washing stand on 3 legs and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus, secured against surprise, he took off his cravat and put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap and sat down before the very low fire to take his gruel. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room, communicated for some purpose now forgotten, with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was, with great astonishment, and with a strange, inexplicable dread, that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound. But soon it rang out loudly, and so did every other bell in the house. And this was succeeded by a clanking noise, deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. And then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, and coming up the stairs, and coming straight to his door. And it came on through the heavy door, and a spectre passed into the room before his eyes, and upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up as though it cried, "I know him, I'm his ghost." The same face, the very same, Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights, and boots. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons of his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he'd never believed it. No, nor did he believe it even now, though he looked the phantom through and through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and noticed the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin. He was still incredulous.
How now? What do you want from me?
Much.
Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Oh, who were you then?
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
Oh, can you sit down?
I can.
We'll do it then.
Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that, in the event of it being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace as if he were quite used to it.
You don't believe in me.
I don't.
Well, what evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?
I don't know.
Well, why do you doubt your senses?
Because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are.
Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is, he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his horror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. How much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head, as if it were too warm to wear indoors. Its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast.
Bertie, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me? Why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men, and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is commended to do so after death.
The spectre raised a cry and shook its chain, wrung its shadowy hands.
You are fettered. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on my own free will, and of my own free will I wear it. Would you know what the weight and length of chain you bear yourself? It was full and heavy and long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago, and you have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain. I cannot tell you all I would. Very little more is permitted of me. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, in life the spirit never rode beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me.
7 years dead? They're traveling all the time, travel fast.
On the wings of the wind.
Oh, you might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years.
Oh, blind man, not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in his little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one's life's opportunities misused. Yet I was like this man. I was once like this man.
But you were always a good man of business, Jacob.
Yes, business. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Mark me, my time is nearly gone.
I will, but don't be hard upon me. Don't be sorry, Jacob, pray.
I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. A chance and hoping of my procuring, Ebenezer.
Oh, you were always a good friend to me.
You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
Oh, is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? I think I'd rather not.
Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow night when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us.
It walked backwards from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the apparition reached it, it was wide open, and the spectre floated out on the bleak, dark night. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. Scrooge tried to say, stopped at the first syllable. And being from the emotion he'd undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, he went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep on the instant.
When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent windows from the opaque walls of his chamber, until suddenly the church clock tolled the deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of the bed were drawn aside by a strange figure, like a child, but not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a greater extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm.
Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
No, your past. The things that you will see with me are shadows of the things that have been. They will have no consciousness of us.
What business brought you here?
Your welfare. Rise and walk with me.
It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes. The bed was warm, and the thermometer a long way below freezing, that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing down a nightcap, and that he had a cold upon him at that time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped its robe in supplication.
I am mortal and liable to fall.
Bear but a touch of my hand there, and you shall be upheld in more than this.
As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished, and the darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day with snow upon the ground. Scrooge clasped his hands together as he looked about him.
Good heavens, I was bred in this place. I was a boy here.
The spirit gazed upon him mildly.
Your lip is trembling. And what is that upon your cheek?
Scrooge muttered with an unusual catching in his voice that it was nothing, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance with its bridge, its church, its school, and a winding river. The ghost brought them to the school.
The school is not quite deserted. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still.
Scrooge saw himself alone in the schoolroom, all the other boys gone home for the holidays. Scrooge looked at the ghost and, with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl came darting in, and putting her arms around his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as a dear, dear brother.
Ebenezer, I've come to bring you home, dear brother. Home, home. Yes, home forever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be that home is like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said, yes, you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you, and you are never to come back here.
The ghost gazed upon the young girl.
Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered. But she had a large heart. She died a woman, and had, as I think, children.
One child.
True, your nephew.
Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind and answered briefly, yes. Although they had but at that moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where it was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here too it was Christmas time. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it.
Know it. I was apprentice here.
They went in. At sight of an old gentleman and a Welsh wig, sitting behind such a high desk that if he'd been 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried out in great excitement,
Why, it's old Fezziwig. Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig. Live again.
Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself, from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice,
Yo-ho there, Ebenezer, Dick!
a living and moving picture of Scrooge's former self, a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice.
Dick Wilkins, to be sure, my fellow apprentice. Yes, yes. There he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Oh, Dick. Dear, dear.
Yo ho, my boys, no more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick, Christmas Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jock Robinson. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here.
Clear away, there was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off as if it were dismissed from public life forevermore. The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came the three Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couples at once, hand half around the back and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and around in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new top couple starting off again as soon as they got there. All top couples at last and not a bottom one to help them. While this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for the purpose. There were more dances, and there were forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boil, when the fiddler struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Missy Fezziwig, top couple too. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. A positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would become of them next. And when old Mr. Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone through all the dance, advance and retire, turn your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place, Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 prentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. The ghost turned to Scrooge.
A small matter to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?
It isn't that. It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to have them come up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune.
He felt the spirit's glance and stopped.
What is the matter?
Nothing particular.
Something, I think.
No. Well, I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all.
His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish. Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air.
My time grows short. Quick.
This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone who could see, but produced an immediate effect. For again he saw himself, he was older now, a man in the prime of life. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a black dress, in whose eyes there were tears.
It matters little. To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me. And if it can comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve.
Well, what idol has placed you?
A golden one. You fear the world too much. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not?
Oh, what then? Even if I've grown much wiser, what then? I am not changed towards you. Have I ever sought release from our engagement?
In words? No, never.
Well, in what then?
In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end. If you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, and even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl, you who weigh everything by gain, but choosing her. Do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do. And I release you with a full heart for the love of him who once was.
Spirit, remove me from this place.
I told you. These were the shadows of things that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me.
Remove me, I cannot bear it. Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer.
As he struggled with the spirit, he was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep.
That's nothing.
Yeah.
It's so good. Yeah. They have so every year, bring them in. Yeah. Yeah. Since yeah, we'll see how it's Study.com. Yeah. And I think, each having each of the Cell phone and all, you're sleeping at the front. It's not part of the show. It's all in our. Why theater? I know. That is the best cider I've ever had. Yeah.
Well, you're gonna. So many people. I think we got it 80s, yes. Maybe it's still.
And I'll go.
Next year. Staying at deep. I know. It's a little more. Not really know about that quite on something.
Long for a kid. We need to open that door, man. Right. Raise your song. Yeah. I know,
Lois?
Something's about to happen.
Where did Graham go?
Yeah, but it's okay.
Never mind, we don't need Graham.
Nobody needs Graham.
Anybody want to come up to read Graham?
You all know it's our 25th,
Yeah.
and there will be a little surprise for you.
Oh.
Coming up now, I think, and it's not great.
No, it's coming up.
We know it's not really a surprise.
Here it comes.
I'm behind my time. Sorry, that delay. I'd like to thank the wonderful people who did the lighting this evening. Mr. Cam Stevens, who is doing the very.
Yes.
Hi, Irene, Norma, Dawn in Hawaii, can you hear us? Good.
Emily?
Judy Getty for the decorations. And of course, Mr. Tuneful himself, Mr. Mark.
That way we have to still have requests to do that when you need them. I'm here.
Scrooge awoke in his bed. There's no doubt about that. But it and his own adjoining sitting room, in which he buckled in his slippers, attracted by a great light there, had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceilings were so hung with living green that they looked a perfect grove. The leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, as if many little mirrors had been scattered there. And such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney, as that petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many, many a winter season gone. Heaped upon the floor, to form a kind of throne, were turkeys, geese, game, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long reeds of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense birth cakes, and great bowls of punch. In easy state, upon this couch, there sat a giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and who raised it high to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door.
Come in, come in. Know me better, man. I'm the Christmas present. Look upon me. You've never seen the like of me before.
Never.
Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young. My elder brother is born in these late years.
I don't think I have. I'm afraid I have not. Have you many brothers in spirit?
More than 1,800.
Oh, a tremendous family to provide for. Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it.
Touch my robe.
Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. The room and its contents all vanished instantly, and they stood in the city streets upon a snowy Christmas morning. Scrooge and the ghost passed on, invisible, straight to Scrooge's box. And on the threshold of the door, the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. Think of that. Bob had but 15 bob a week himself. He pocketed on Saturdays, but 15 copies of his own Christian name. And yet, the golden Christmas present blessed his four-roomed house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a spice-burned gown, brave in ribbons which are cheap, and make a goodly show for sixpence. And she laid the cloth, assisted by Miss Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes and, getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable park. And now two smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own. And basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onions, these young Cratchits danced about the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he blew the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. Mrs. Cratchit looked about anxiously.
Well, what has ever got your precious father then? And your brother Tiny Tim? And Martha weren't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour.
It's Martha, Mother. Rather such a goose, Mother.
Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are.
Oh, we did a deal of work to finish up last night. Had to clear away this morning, Mother.
Well, never mind, so long as you are come. Now sit you down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm, Lord bless you.
No, there's Father coming. Hi, Martha.
So Arthur hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas, for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. Bob looked around.
Why, where's our Martha?
Not coming.
Not coming? Not coming upon Christmas Day?
But Martha didn't like to seem disappointed, even if it was only a joke, so she came out prematurely behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the two young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper.
And how did little Tim behave?
Oh, as good as gold and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day, who made lame beggars walk and blind men see.
Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. Tiny Tim's active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool beside the fire. And while Bob, turning up his cups, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, and stirred it round and round and put it on the hot to simmer, Master Peter and the two ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, which they soon returned in high procession. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigour. Miss Belinda sweetened up the apple sauce. Martha dusted the plates, and Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a corner at the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounted guard upon their posts, cramming spoons into their mouths, as they should shrink the goose before their turn came to be helped. And at last the dishes were set on and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly down all the way along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight rose all round the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the young Cratchits, beat on the table with his handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Tenderness, flavour, size, and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for a whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone on a dish, they hadn't eaten it all at last. Yet everyone had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onions to the eyebrows. But now the plates were changed by Miss Belinda, and Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done. Suppose it would break and turn out. Suppose someone had got over the wall in the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goods. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Hello, a great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed and smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing half a cup of ignited brandy and beducked with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Oh, wonderful pudding. Bob Cratchit said, and Con too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind, but she would confess she had her doubts about the quality of the flour, and everybody had something to say about it. But nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. And at last the dinner was all done, and the cloth was cleared, and the hearth swept, and the fire made up, and the compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were placed upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew around the hearth. Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done. And Bob served it out with beaming looks while the chestnuts on the fire splattered and crackled nicely. And then Bob proposed a toast.
A Merry Christmas to us all, my dear. God bless us.
God bless us.
He said, God bless us, everyone, said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side on his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side and dreaded that he might be taken from. Scrooge watched with an interest he never felt before.
Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live.
I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die.
No, oh no, kind spirits, say he will be spared.
What then? If he be like to die, he'd better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Scrooge hung his head at his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. He then raised his head speedily on hearing his own name.
Mr. Scrooge, I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
The founder of the feast, indeed. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it.
My dear, the children, Christmas Day.
Oh, it should be Christmas Day, I'm sure, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. Oh, you know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you, poor fellow.
My dear, Christmas Day.
I'll drink his health for your sake, and the day's, not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt.
The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of the proceedings that had no heartiness in it, and Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care tuppence for it. And Scrooge was the ogre of the family, and the mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. The Cratchits were not a handsome. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were very happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded and looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially at Tiny Tim, until the last. Without a word of warning from the ghost, the scene vanished, and Scrooge was greatly surprised to hear a hearty laugh. It was as much great surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room with the spirit standing smiling by his side and looking at the same nephew. And Scrooge's nephews laughed, and a man more blessed in a laugh than Scrooge's nephew I should like to know. And it's a clear-handed and noble adjustment of things that while there is infection in disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor. And when Scrooge's nephew laughed, Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, laughed out lustily. Scrooge's nephew continued with his tale.
He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live, and he believed it too.
More shame for him, Fred.
Now Scrooge's niece was very pretty, exceedingly pretty, with a dimpled, surprising-looking, capital face, a bright little mouth that seemed made to be kissed, as no doubt it was, and the sunniest pair of eyes you ever saw in any little creature's head. Though she was what you would call provoking, but satisfactory too. Oh, perfectly satisfactory.
He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Here he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come to dine with us. What's the consequence? Well, he don't lose much of a dinner.
Indeed, I think he loses a very fine dinner.
Well, I'm very glad to hear it, because I haven't any great faith in these young housekeepers. What do you say, Topper?
Well, Topper clearly had his eye on one of Scrooge's niece's sisters, and answered that the bachelors are wetted outcast and had no right to express an opinion on the subject. Whereas Scrooge's niece's sister, the plump one with the lace tucker, not the one with the roses, blushed. Now, after tea, they had some music, for they were a musical family and knew what they were about when they sang a glee or a catch, I'm sure. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. And after a while, they played at forfeits. For it is good to be children sometimes, and never better at Christmas, when its mighty founder was the child himself. There was first a game of blind man's butler, and I believe Topper was really blinded, and I believe he had eyes in his boots, because the way in which he went after that plump sister in the late garden was an outrage on the credulity of human nature. Knocking down the firearms, tumbling over the chairs, bumping up against the piano, smothering himself behind the curtains. Wherever she went, there he went. He always knew where the punches was. He wouldn't catch anybody else. Now, if you'd fallen up against him, as some did, and stood there, he would make a feint of endeavouring to seize you, and would instantly have sidled off in the direction of the punch. And then there was a game called Yes and No, which Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what. He only answering to their questions yes or no, as the case was. The fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal. A live animal, rather a disagreeable animal. A savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes and talked sometimes and lived in London and walked the streets and wasn't made a show of, and wasn't there by anybody, did live in a menagerie, and was never killed in a market, and was not a horse, or an ass, or a cow, or a bull, or a tiger, or a dog, or a pig, or a cat, or a bear. At every new question put to him, the nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get off the sofa and at last the plump sister cried out,
I have found it out. I know what it is, Fred. I know what it is.
What is it?
It's your Uncle Scrooge.
which it certainly was. The admiration was the sentiment. There's some objection that the reply is in a pair, ought to be yes.
He has given us plenty of merriment, I'm sure, and it would be ungrateful not to drink to his health. I say, Uncle Scrooge.
Well, Uncle Scrooge.
A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is. he wouldn't take it from me, but may he have it nevertheless. Uncle Scrooge.
Uncle Scrooge!
Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have drunk to the unconscious company in an audible speech. But the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by the nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirit stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful, on foreign lands, and they were close at home, by struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope, by poverty, and was rich. In almshouse, hospital, jail, in misery's every refuge, where vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door, and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing, and taught Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, but it was only a night. And only now did Scrooge notice something strange at the bottom of the spirit's robe. From the foldings of its robe, the spirit revealed two wretched children at its feet.
Oh man, look here. Look down here.
They were a boy and a girl, ragged, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at his feet and clung onto the outside of the garment. Scrooge stared back, appalled.
Oh, Spirit, are they yours?
They are mankind's. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware them both, but most of all, beware this boy. For on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased.
Oh no, have they no refuge or recourse?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it no more. At the last stroke ceased to vibrate. He remembered the prediction of old Jacob Mark, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards them.
The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved.
I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, ghost of the future. I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I got, I am prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?
It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them.
Lead on, the night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit.
They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them. But there they were, in the heart of it, on change amongst the merchants. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk.
Yeah, no, I don't know much about it either. I only know he's dead.
When did he die?
Last night, I believe.
Why? What was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die.
Oh, God knows.
What has he done with his money?
I haven't heard. Company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know.
Yes, well, it's likely to be a cheap funeral, for upon my life, I don't know of anybody to go to it.
I don't mind going, if a lunch is provided. I must be fed or I stay at home.
Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversation apparently so trivial, but feeling assured that it must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. It could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was past, and this ghost's province was the future. He looked about in that very place for his own image, But another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been revolving in his mind a change of life, and he thought and hoped he saw his newborn resolutions carried out in this. They left this busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town, to a low shop, where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. A gray-haired rascal of great age sat smoking his pipe. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop, but she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black. After a short period of blank astonishment in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all three burst into a laugh.
Oh, let the charwoman alone to be the first. Let the thunderers alone to be the second, and let the undertaker's man alone to be the third. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it.
Oh, you couldn't have met in a better place. We have had three a bit long ago, you know, and the other two ain't strangers. Well, what have you got to sell? Come on, what have you got to sell?
Half a minute's patience, Joe, and you shall see.
What odds then? What odds, Mrs. Dilbert? Every person has a right to take care of himself. He always did. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose.
No, indeed, ma'am, no.
If he wanted to keep him after he was dead, a wicked old screw. Why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying, gasping out there, all alone by himself.
Yeah.
It's the truest word that ever was spoke. It's a judgment on him.
Oh, I wish it were a little heavier judgment, and it should have been. You may depend upon it. I would have laid my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe. Let me know the value out of it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see it.
What do you call this? Bed curtains?
Ah, bed curtains.
You don't mean to say you took him down, rings and all, with him lying there?
Yes, I do. Now don't drop that oil upon the blankets now.
Yes, blankets.
Well, whose else do you think? He isn't likely to take cold without them, I dare say. Now you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache. You won't find a hole in it, nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had. Refined one too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me.
What do you mean, wasted it?
Well, somebody was fool enough to dress him up in it, to be buried in. Oh, I took it off again. Calico ain't good enough for such a purpose. That is becoming to the body, and he can't look uglier than he did in that one.
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror.
I see. That the case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heavens, what is this?
He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bare, uncurtained bed. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon this bed, and on it, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this plundered, unknown man.
Spirit, let me see some tenderness connected with a death, or this dark chamber spirit will be forever pleasant to me.
The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet. Very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in needlework, but surely they were very quiet.
And he took a child, and he set him in the midst of them.
Where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out, as he and the spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on? The mother laid her work upon the table, and put her hand up to her face.
The colour hurts my eyes.
The color? Oh, poor tiny Tim.
They're better now again. Makes them weak by candlelight. I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It's been near his time.
Well, past it rather. I think he's walked a little slower than he used his last few evenings, Mother.
I have known him walk with. I've known him walk with tiny Tim upon his shoulder, very fast indeed.
And so have I often.
But he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so that it was no trouble. No trouble. And then is your father at the door?
She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob and his comforter came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, father, don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with them, and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said.
Sunday? You went today then, Robert?
Yes, my dear, I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is, but you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday. My little child, my little child.
He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been farther apart, perhaps, than they were.
Inspector, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man that was with the covered face whom we saw lying dead.
The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one.
Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be only?
Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood.
Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if persevered in, they must lead. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. The state is up with what you show me.
The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards the grave, trembling as he went, and, following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge.
Am I that man who lay upon the bed? No, Spirit, no, no. Spirit, hear me. I am not that man. I will not be the man I must have been, but for this intercourse. Why, show me this. Now I'm past all hope. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life.
For the first time, the kind hand faltered.
I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons they will teach. Don't tell me I may sponge away the writing on that stone.
Holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own, the room was his own, best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to find him. Scrooge grasped the bed curtains and folded them into his arms.
They are not torn down. They are not torn down, rings and all. They are here. I am here. The shadows of the things that would have been, maybe just as they will be. I know they will.
Scrooge began to laugh and cry in the same breath.
I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. Oh, I was happy as an angel. Oh, I was merry as a schoolboy. I am giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas, everybody, and a Happy New Year to all the world.
He had frisked into the sitting room and was now standing there perfectly winded.
There's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered, and there's the corner where the ghost of Christmas presents happened. That's the window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right, it's all true, it's all happy.
Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, night, clear, bright, stirring, golden day. Scrooge looked down to see a boy in Sunday clothes and called out to him.
What's today?
Aye?
What's today, my fine fellow.
Today? Oh, Christmas Day.
Oh, it's Christmas Day, have you missed it? Hello, my fine fellow.
Hello?
You know the poulterers at the next street book at the corner.
I should hope I did.
Oh, an intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one.
What? The one that's been saying?
What a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, me back.
He's hanging there now.
Is it go buy it?
Go.
No, I'm in interest. They earn it. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here, that I may give them the directions where to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown.
The boy was off like a shot.
I'll send it to Bob Cratchit. He can't know who sent it. It's past the size of Tiny Tim.
The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write as he did somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the postman. As he stood by the door, waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye.
I should never, long as I live. I scarcely ever looked at it before, and what an honest expression it has on its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Now, here's the turkey. Oh. How are you? Merry Christmas.
It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. He would have snapped them short off in a minute like sticks of sealing wax.
Well, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town. You must have a cab.
The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again and chuckled till he cried. Scrooge dressed himself all in his best and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind them, Scrooge regarded every one with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-natured, good-humored fellows said,
Good morning, sir. Merry Christmas. Good morning.
Good morning.
and Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, these were the blithest in his ears. He went to church and walked about the streets and watched the people hurrying to and fro and patted children on the head and questioned beggars and looked down into the kitchens of houses and up to the windows and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash and did it.
Is your master at home, my dear?
Yes, sir.
Where is he, my love?
It's in the dining room, sir, with his mistress.
Oh, he knows me. I'll go in, my dear. Right? Well, bless my soul, who's that? It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, please?
Let him in. It is a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did Topper when he came. So did the plump sister when she came. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming in late, that was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. The clock struck 9, no Bob. A quarter past, no Bob. Bob was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come into the tank. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock.
Hello. What do you mean by coming in at this hour?
Yeah, I'm very sorry, so I'm behind my time.
Yes, I think you are. Step this way, please.
Oh, it's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
No, I tell you what, my friend, I'm not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. Therefore, I am about to raise your salary.
Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him and calling to the people in the court for help and a straight waistcoat.
Merry Christmas, Bob. Merry Christmas, Bob, my good fellow. Then I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop Bob. Make up the fires and buy a second cold scuffle before you dock another eye, Bob.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but his own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived in that respect upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed,
God bless us, everyone.
Not coming home yet.
Oh, okay, well, this is the 25th year. Thank you so much for sharing this evening with us. It's been a delight to have you for the last quarter of a century, some of you, not many. We thought we would honor this occasion by giving the lucky winner a very small prize. And so we are going to have skill testing questions. And if you know the answer, put up your hands, kind of like that school we were just discussing. When we have one hand up, that person gets the prize. If there are 5 hands, we will keep moving along. So, are you ready?
you see their hands?
I'll help you.
You want light?
We'll help you.
We don't know if hands are up back there.
I can't see.
That's okay. What's the question?
Yeah.
One moment,
This one's for you, Ron. What was the name of the dance led by Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig?
Hands up.
Roger or something like that.
So close.
Yes. Carol and Peter have been here every year, pretty much. Yeah, so you kind of cheated. Let's keep going.
Let's slip it through the dance.
Yeah, can you show us the Roger? That's the other part of the question.
Come on up.
Wink with your legs. Go on. You, Carol.
Well, we'll pass it down. Make it like a collection. Thank you very much. The prize is a facsimile of the original Christmas Carol novel, not the short version we're reading, the full novel. I'm sorry?